My name is Katrina Johnston-Zimmerman, and I'm an urban anthropologist. I specialize in human behavior in public space and also focus on women in cities and future cities in particular. I live in the best neighborhood in Philadelphia. No. But I do really love where I live, of course. I live in Queen Village, which is sort of within the downtown area off to the east, so just south of South Street. When I first moved to Philadelphia, I lived in Society Hill, and essentially I chose those places because of their walkability. Yes, well, to start at the beginning, I guess, Philadelphia was a very planned city, obviously, because it was trying to enact an ideal upon society. One of the earliest cities in the country, planned by Billy Penn, William Penn. We just call him Billy. But that neighborhood in particular used to actually be a merchant's quarter. And so Ed Bacon, who was in charge of planning at the time, decided to reimagine it as an upper-class social status kind of enclave. He did away with a lot of the mercantile aspects of the place, so any mixed-use development was completely done away with, and it was revitalized to represent the original ideal of the city itself. Lots of shutters, a lot of brickwork, and things like that. It's really lovely to walk down, but essentially it has become the wealthiest neighborhood in the city, and because of that, that ownership of place has done things like push out buffered bike lanes, for instance, and other elements that they have become accustomed to not having in their neighborhood. This is actually why I moved to Philadelphia, to be totally honest. So the streets in particular have stayed the same for so long that the city itself has this incredible walkable and bikeable grid that persists until today. While it doesn't have the infrastructure necessarily entirely in the city itself, there are a lot of plans in place to improve those areas and elements of a streetscape, to right-size certain streets and so forth. But in the meantime, it's also just walkable as it is. So that kind of city structure and those small blocks and those really actually interesting streets to walk down is so amazing to have out of my doorstep. And most people in the city actually do have that. There are a lot of places that don't, obviously, like any city with sidewalks and sidewalks and like maintenance and everything else that is a major issue for most cities. But even still, Philly really has those bones, and that's what makes it such a unique place, I think, in this country. What's actually interesting about Philadelphia, to sort of answer your question, to be honest, is that it's this scrappy kind of bottom-up ownership over the streets that really makes them work. So it's less about the top-down planning control or that large-scale plan that will happen over time, but it's actually about the people themselves and how they decide to take ownership over that semi-public space, especially right in front of row homes. So Philly has the kind of housing stock that is perfect for human habitation, which is why I also love it. Their streets have buildings surrounding it that are at a human scale that make you feel comfortable. So those row homes, unfortunately, they sometimes do have, roof decks and things like that, but they don't have a lot of public space in them. They don't always have porches and things like that. So they actually push their public life into the sidewalk itself. So it's so common to see tables and chairs put outside. And I've even seen examples of people putting signs on those tables that say things like, you're allowed to use this space even if you don't live here, as long as you just sort of, take your things with you when you go. And the same can be said for planters, for flowers, for planters outside of windows. I've even seen people planting trees in unused tree beds where the tree has been removed. And then, of course, the street as a multi-use space is often used as a play space. You just push out some trash cans and then your kids can play in it. I would say it is an overlooked example of one of the best opportunities to be a great American city. And that is actually why I moved there, and that's why I work there and try and make it better for myself and my neighbors and everyone else, is that it has that potential. It has the bones, it has the grit and the gumption. It needs a little bit more of the willpower, but it can be done. And so that's actually what I think is most interesting in it being overlooked, because it has has more potential, I think, than many of the cities that receive the spotlight more often. Philly is definitely still a car-centric city, which is the same with most cities across this country in particular, of course. But many of the places in the city have actually become those kinds of blue-collar enclaves that we wanted to retain in other cities that ended up moving to the suburbs, for instance, and so forth. And so because of that, they still actually sometimes even reverse commute out of the city. And they often rely on automobiles to get around because there's still not a really excellent, disbursement of, say, for instance, grocery stores or whatever have you. So there's still a reliance on the automobile, and I would say that is the biggest hurdle to making better streets or a better city in general, because taking any kind of parking away, Philly is famous for parking in the median and even on the sidewalk. So it's an unfortunate reality, but it's a culture change that we definitely need to focus on. It might not sound like it's off the beaten track, although I think that to some extent it is these days, but I would tell you to come to South Street. I am definitely biased. I live right by this street. I'm also involved in the local business improvement district and have worked on that street, especially in the pandemic, to create a semi-pedestrianized environment. So in some ways, a response to having to eat outdoors, but also because it has the ability as a sort of main street to really represent Philadelphia in its fullest extent. So at this moment, even without the pedestrianization or anything like that, if you go to South Street, you really are absorbing all of Philly. It has a lot of incredible cultural elements. The history of the street is incredible, and also just literally something for everyone. So even if you just want to get a really good cheesesteak, you can find that. But if you want to see amazing art, if you want to hear music, if you want to hang out at one of the best bars in the city, that's the place to go to.